Good afternoon, 12:05, and once again, it is time for that bunch of audio confusion we call the Eric Scott Show here on WASR. Thank you for being with us. We do appreciate it. And today, a guest that I've talked to before when I've worked in other cities. We've always had really good relationship. What I found very interesting is he used to have or may still have a local cable access show, and he used to bring in his camera. And I got to tell you, I hate being on television, but, you do what you got to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you Bob Parks. Now, Bob is, shall we say, not the mainstream in his political views. He is a black Republican. And Bob, first of all, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Let's start with that. All right. Second of all, are you still doing the black and white work that you were doing when we spoke some years earlier?
No, I stopped doing those. Well, actually, let me take that back. My wife did talk me into doing a video based on a post that I'd written in 2009 that was directly countering a narrative that was put out on the Democrat Party website, where they said, basically, I'm just paraphrasing, that the Democrat Party has been supportive of civil rights for as long as the nation's been around, which is a bold-faced lie. And so I wrote a piece on that based just on the screenshot. I wasn't trying to say I've rediscovered black history like others have done. I just was trying to counter that one narrative. And it's been a post called the Democrat Race Lie that's been very popular on our website. So my wife just said, you really have to make this into a video. So this was basically the first video that I have done, I think probably since maybe 2008, about 2008, 2009.
Oh, okay.
And because I've moved on to other things, I was working for the think tank in D.C., in the D.C. area in 2009, and been moving on and sort of looking to diversify my professional pursuits, let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, that perfectly makes sense. Now, let me...
I'm confused.
By the way, if you have a question for Bob or anything about what we're talking about, 603-569-LAKE is the number. 603-569-5253 will get you on the air here at WASR. Have you always been a Republican? We usually start getting our political leanings in our teens. Is that what kind of always attracted you?
No, actually, I grew up as your traditional, stereotypical black Massachusetts, Boston Democrat. I don't know why. I mean, I was not very political as a child. And it wasn't until after I joined the Navy and I was stationed on the USS Midway, which was a carrier that was home ported in Yokosuka, Japan. It's now a museum in San Diego. But when we went to one of our first trips was we stopped in the Philippines, and I got a chance to go to a barrio. And it was basically like a Sally Struthers, one of those Sally Struthers commercials about poverty, a poverty-stricken area, except it was real. And there was the heat, the humidity, the flies, the smells, all that good stuff that wasn't just encapsulated in a 30-second commercial. Mm-hmm. And it was at that point that I started thinking back on all of the things I was taught about how terrible a country the United States was. And it sort of hit me that of all the places I could have been born, I mean, I could have been born in that barrio, but I was born in the United States of America. And it was a question of that eye-opening, and then a subsequent few years later, when I was working in Los Angeles for Fox Broadcasting, and a friend of mine turned me on to that racist on the radio named Rush Limbaugh.
Oh, him,
And
yes.
yeah, I started listening to him for a few years. And then what was really the kicker for me was when one day my kids came home from middle school and said, "Daddy, what's a BJ?"
Whoops.
And this was, of course, during the whole Clinton Lewinsky thing. And, at
Ah,
that point, I threw my hands up. I said, I am done making excuses for this man, for this party. And I changed my party registration. That was in 1995
okay.
and haven't looked back since.
So when we spoke I think the last time we spoke was '05, '06, somewhere in there, you were, you still had pretty hard right leanings. Has advancing age, pardon the expression, kind of rounded the corners off, or are you still pretty much a hardcore Republican?
Oh, well, let's just put it this way. I am a hardcore Republican. That doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with a lot of the Republicans that are presented to us, whether politically or also in the media. Obviously, Mitt Romney is someone who I would choose not to really want to have lunch with. The same with the late John McCain. There are a ton of Republicans out there who are rhinos. You just look at the governor of the state of Massachusetts as we speak. So there are Republicans who they're not anyone that I would say represent me or my views. But at the same time, I'd love someone like Donald Trump. My wife pointed out that in I think it was 2011, I mentioned just in passing in a column that I thought Donald Trump would be a great person to run only because he would not lay down to the media. The media believes that they are the kingmakers, that they are the ones who, and Mika Brzezinski even came right out and said that it's the job of the media to tell us what to think. If you think about all the bubbleheads in the media, that's a scary prospect. But no, I am a conservative. I love the fact that we have a president who pushes back and doesn't lay down in a fetal position and take it. And but no, I don't think my views. I like to be consistent. And when I see politicians who are not consistent, that's sort of one of the things that drive my wife and I up a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't really matter what party you're in. That's sort of another reason why that. For all intents and purposes, as far as the quote unquote conservative movement, that in times that my wife and I are pariahs because we call out Republicans who screw up just as often and as vociferously as we would a Democrat who does.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't have the integrity on our side, then what good are we trying to deliver any kind of message?
Well, I agree that both parties have made an art form out of putting their foot in their mouth. The Republicans, however, seem to have written the book on it. But that doesn't mean every Republican, thinks like that. But there have been some things where you go, oh my God, how did they even, how did they even say that? Let me ask you this, and you probably get asked this a lot. Do you find yourself have you gotten pushback from some of your other black friends or family who have said that this is not, how a black man is supposed to think?
Well, just the very premise, and this is not. I'm not going to be responding to you in that question, but yeah, as the hypothetical that you've asked, that in itself is a very, if you think about it, racist notion. That because we all look alike, we're all supposed to think and vote alike.
I agree, but I've seen it happen more than once.
The Democrat Party, if you think about it, every 2 to 4 years, they have to face black folk who ask and they ask them again and again and again and again not to take the black vote for granted. Now, why would they have to keep doing that? If as Malcolm X said in 1964, that he believes that if you continue to vote for Democrats, that black people are chumps. He basically laid out the argument, which you see coming into fruition today, that the white vote is pretty evenly split, and it's usually the black vote is the tipping point. That was the case in 2016, where the black vote didn't really come out for Hillary as much as they did for Obama in the previous two elections.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at the fact that black issues, the same thing that black people have been bitching and crying about and complaining about for decades, they're still bitching and crying and screaming about. That is until Donald Trump in 2016 said to black people, "What do you got to lose? Vote for me." And so what had happened pre-COVID, we've had historically low black unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
Historical black colleges had to keep begging to Democrat administrations and Republican administrations for decades to get funding. Donald Trump basically said, "Okay, you don't have to come back here anymore. We're going to take care of it for the next few years." I mean, but going back to, I'm sorry, that was the long way about answering your question, but no, there are times, especially when you look at certain black Republicans who speak out, you will see the true racism coming from not only black Democrats, but white Democrats. It seems like the N-word is flying left and right. And any other racial epithet you can think of. And I'm not looking at calling myself a victim here. I kind of find it humorous when it happens, because basically it basically disproves that the left are the party of the tolerant and inclusive, because when a black person gets off, and part of the use of the phrase, the Democrat plantation, they're treated like runaway slaves, worthy of being shot in the back. And whether it's, just with the use of incendiary racial epithets, they will go there. They have no problem when it's a black Republican.
It's funny you say that about the left being intolerant. And, 2 years ago, I would have said, I don't agree with you. But a conversation I had on Facebook yesterday really rammed that home. Of course, you may not know him personally, George Takei from Star Trek. He, of course, is gay and posts quite a lot on his Facebook page about different things. And he had mentioned that Marvel has decided to make one of their comic book characters bisexual. And the first comment I had was, well, who cares? What do I care if this person is gay, transsexual, worships a head of lettuce? What do I care? And I got savaged by the left, who's, it's important, it's inclusive, it's your silence is vaguely offensive, and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Because you're a little bit more familiar with politics than I am, when did the ultra left become the party of intolerance? It was always the Republican Party.
Well, that is the myth. But let's put it this way: the Democrat Party, and if your listeners get a chance to go online and just type in the Democrat race lie, and I don't have it called up in front of me right now, but basically the Republican Party, and I think Ulysses S. Grant was the president at the time, basically had to write legislation outlawing the Ku Klux Klan, which was an organization that basically was an enforcement arm of the Democratic Party. So we can go back, okay, when it comes to intolerance. And I think one of, if you want to just bring up a concept or a group that embodies what we would call intolerance, I think we could all be in agreement that the Ku Klux Klan would be in the running. Well, they were an enforcement arm of the Democrat Party. And if you were black and a Republican, because you weren't allowed, as far as the Democrats concerned, to vote any other way, you couldn't vote for them, and if they even let you vote. And any white person who was in support of black people as far as being abolitionists, they were also fair game too. So it wasn't just a one size fits all when it came to the Klan. They went after anybody, and that is the epitome of intolerance. And so when you look at gay activists today, a gay activist I also equate with Muslim activists. They always like to liken their cause, and they always bring up that they are part of a civil rights movement. And in this country, when you talk about civil rights, you're basically talking about the 50s and the 60s and black people. So they try to liken what they're going to through today with what blacks went through, a century or two ago. And that's always been one reason why, if you look at polls and opinion pieces, that black people have not always been on board or been down for the struggle when it came to gay rights, because of that false equivalence that's always been thrown in there to give them legitimacy. And it just seems when you have nowadays, when it comes to the left, when they have any kind of an aggrieved group, they'll always throw those words civil rights in to give them that little bit of a boost. But again, those two words have been specifically aimed at a certain point of time in our history that involves the redress of slavery, and then also the segregationists. And look at segregation today. The left are the ones who are calling for segregation. You look at college campuses; they want white and black dorms. They want, straight dorms, gay dorms. They're the ones who are now pushing for segregation. But something, it's in their blood. So, that's what it is.
My guest this afternoon is political humorist and activist Bob Parks. He's a very smart guy. And if you would like to talk to him, you can call 569-5253. Area code to New Hampshire is 603, whether you're listening online or on air. And by the way, more for Bob than anybody else. The show, if you missed it or want to catch it again, it will be on our website, wasr.net. Click on podcasts, and you can download the audio in case you want to send it to grandma or, whatever else you want to do with it. Now, a minute ago, we were just talking about I'll refresh my memory because I just had a senior moment.
Well, if I may, just really quick, you are the first person who has ever called me a humorist. And, I was talking to my wife the other day, and when, with my show, when I was doing it in Massachusetts, I was trying to make the show humorous, but informative.
Right.
I wasn't one of these people who comes out like today and they're angry and shouting at their TV or their camera and just being, I tried to make it light. And I just wanted to thank you. You're the first person ever in all these years who's called me a humorist.
Well, I appreciate that. I've been reading your stuff since, we did shows together back in Keene more than 10 years ago, because I've always found your writing fascinating. I don't always agree with it, but I do find it fascinating. And I'm quite honored. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Well, let's, we were talking just a minute ago, and I remember civil rights. And while I agree with, that gays or anybody else should have the same civil rights as the rest of us, they didn't have separate water fountains. They didn't have water cannons and dogs. And what's the guy in Alabama standing on the bridge going, segregation now, segregation forever? But on the other hand, I think that the black civil rights movement did indeed pave the way for the LGBT movement. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not trying to say mine is bigger than yours. Okay?
No, I get that.
It's never been the argument. But you go back, for example, and I was living in California when Proposition 8 was the gay marriage proposition, and when black people, I think it was something like 7 out of 10 black people have voted against Proposition 8.
Really?
That's when all the racism came out. Okay, there were pieces, there were signs that if you called me F word, I'll call you N word. I mean, it was cut loose, because for the most part, and this is another thing that I think is very interesting about the black demographic, if you were to go to the hood, and I don't know how much experience you have driving through your average run-of-the-mill hood in any city.
Bob, I live in New Hampshire. We don't have any
but
hoods.
but you'll see more places of worship per square block than probably anywhere else in the country. There are churches of big and small sizes. So black people, for the most part, are very God-fearing people.
Mm-hmm.
They are, and then a lot of those teachings within the church are fairly conservative.
Yes.
So when black people came out mostly against gay marriage because it goes against their religious teachings, it's no real surprise. But the activists were basically triggered by anyone who had the nerve to disagree with them. So there's always been this little rift between gay activists and blacks. They'll form alliances when convenient, but not always are blacks on board, especially when, for example, like you were just saying, gay people, for the most part of a couple of centuries, didn't have to feel the sting of a lash. They didn't lose their freedom. And in some cases, and I've always also made this comparison, that when gay people walk into a room, and this is a blanket statement, so I know what's probably going to come, so please bear with me. When gay people walk into a room, you won't know that they're gay until the second or third sentence when you're talking to them, when they will bring it up.
Okay.
When I walk into a room, you will automatically know what I am. So when I go to a job interview, or if I'm going to some place where my political views are going to be judged, if you're gay, they won't know what side you're on if you don't say anything. For some strange reason, whenever I walk into a room, everybody assumes I'm a Democrat. Okay, because of the color of my skin. So again, it's there. I think that the rift between the black community and the gay community has been an intolerance of the black person's religious views, and the ease in which, if you disagree, and again, it's not just with gays, and we got cancel culture. If you disagree, you are fair game for whatever nasty epithets that can be thrown your way, whether it revolves your gender, whether it's your race, whatever. It's all fair game.
Well, something you said a few minutes ago, you mentioned that the left can be very, very racist. Even though just the fact of throwing that word around can be racist. However, there are historically black colleges and universities. There is the Congressional Black Caucus. There is the United Negro College Fund. All, fine organizations, don't get me wrong. However, and this is something I've always wanted to ask, if there was a United Caucasian Persons College Fund, there would be a hue and cry that you would probably hear in Siberia. Why do you think that, and maybe that's just the way I think, that there are a lot of African Americans who, at least to me, say, I want to be equal, and that's the way it should be, but I want to be equal over here. I don't want to be equal over here with you. Or am I looking at it wrong?
Well, now this also could be a discussion for another day, because some of the groups that you're mentioning are nonprofits.
True.
And nonprofits rely on vague mission statements that can never be solved, can never be finalized. You have some environmentalist nonprofits that their mission is to save the planet.
Good luck with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you have some that say we want to feed children.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have they have these vague mission statements that are intentionally created so they can never be solved, so they can keep getting donor dollars. I mean, if the United Negro College Fund, if for some strange reason that we could ever get to a point where people could go to a college and not have to worry about the costs, whether they're financially independent. I mean, I don't know about how old you are, but I remember I put myself through college. I didn't take out a loan. Actually, I did take out a loan. It was for $6,000. But it was something that I had every intention of paying back, and it wasn't some stupid money, Ivy League college either. But so racism itself is a cottage industry. And there are some organizations that it is in their interest to see that whenever they can, pick up a rock with some racist undertone underneath, that they can pounce on it. And there are people in this country, I would say the vast majority of people in this country get along just fine. But when something happens somewhere and you have a media megaphone that can blow it up into a national story, and then you can have a Jesse Jackson or an Al Sharpton or Sean King or somebody can just swoop in and blow this thing up, and then as soon as it's blown up, they can just hop on their jet and fly away and leave the tumults to the people on the ground. That keeps it going.
So, in other words, to them, to Sharpton and Farrakhan and all of racism is a business.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
it is.
I'm glad it's not just me that thinks that.
No, and it's exacerbated when you watch cable news shows. I mean, I am so done with doing cable news interviews, especially when you see these, if you were to go on CNN, for example, or MSNBC, and you'd be that one conservative against the host, and then three other people who are all shouting into your ear at the same time. So it's basically a 3 or a 4 on 1. Okay, I met this guy Ellis Hennigan. He writes for Newsday in New York City, but whenever I would see him on television, on one of these cable news talking head shows, I'd want to throw something at my own TV. This guy angered me so much. I met him at an event, a Black Republican event in Manhattan, and I believe this was somewhere around 2005. And when his TV persona was turned off, he was the nicest guy. I mean, he and I are friends to this day. Anytime I send him a message, he'll respond immediately. I mean, he's a really nice guy. But when I hear him on the radio, and so what happens is you have these people, for the sake of quote unquote entertainment, these news companies will find someone from the far left and put them on against someone on the far right, and they know that these are people who are just blabbermouths and vindictive people who will just go at each other. Now, it makes for great television, but it also gives this false illusion to the American people that we've got these huge differences, and we don't.
Well, to be honest, I will disagree that it makes great television, because, at least to me, it gets old very quick.
Well, you know what I mean when it comes to the television broadcast network television template, when it comes to the word conflict.
Yes, okay. I understand.
So that's what I was meaning. Yes, it does get old watching it, but at the same time, it must do something for ratings and advertising, because it's been going on and it will continue to go on. You'll get the most vile, blabbermouth people on these cable news shows. It's some of these people, you can tell they're just doing it, and you don't know if they really believe it, but they know it's something that's going to get them back on again.
And the funny part is, from a business standpoint, the networks love it. They don't pay the guests. You've got the one host, you've got a set, a couple of robotic cameras. These things are cheaper to produce than game shows, which is, why they're so popular.
Well, here's another thing, too. You know what makes for really great television? And I'm saying this as a person who's worked in network television and produced my own show, and I know a bunch of people in the industry. You know what makes for really, really good television footage? A good old-fashioned riot.
Oh, yeah.
So whenever there is a flare-up, because there's that old adage of if a tree falls in the forest, did it make a sound? How many of these things that have been blown up into national stories would have gained the traction that they have if they weren't covered? And I'm not saying that you shouldn't cover the news, but you shouldn't sensationalize it either, and you shouldn't be instigating it. The very first job I ever had in journalism after I got out of the Navy I was a reporter for the Guam Tribune, and the editor called me into his office and he said, "Bob, it's the job of the media to report the news, not incite it." And we see news being incited all the time, to the detriment of people who live in neighborhoods that are getting buildings burned down because people, provocateurs nowadays know all they have to do to basically flick the network TV switch to get attention, and it spreads. It's highly irresponsible.
No, I agree with you. While you're right, I miss people like the team that was on PBS forever and ever, Huntley Brinkley.
That was NBC. In fact, I used to watch the Huntley Brinkley. That was NBC.
Oh, NBC. I'm sorry.
Back in the day.
And Cronkite and Dan Rather. Regardless of what you think of these people, they were ethical journalists that didn't. Well, late in his career, Dan has become more of an opinion piece than a newscaster, but that's his right if he wants to do that. But what I'm saying is you could watch the news and you knew what the news was. Entertainment has firmly stuck its camel's nose under the tents, and it's going to stay there because it brings an awful lot of money. And I think that's the problem, is then people like me, who aren't part of the political process, we think that the whole country is falling apart. We see Facebook discussions with our friends where they start pulling out insults, Democrats, libtards, that type of thing on both sides. It's to the point where literally I don't know what to think anymore. And I'm ready to throw up my hands and say, the hell with it. Have you found that there are a lot of people doing that lately?
Well, it'll be interesting in retrospect if we could get that Wayback Machine, go back in time to about 2005, 2006, when MySpace was dying. There was YouTube was just about to be unveiled. Facebook and Twitter were not yet in existence. But let's say in order to have been able to get a YouTube account or a Twitter account or a Facebook account, you had to do the same thing you would have to do in order to get a driver's license. You would have to provide your real name. You would have to provide a town. Now, you might not want to be specific as far as the street because of privacy issues, but you'd have to at least provide your town and an accurate picture of yourself.
Right.
Because when people can hide behind anonymous avatars and fake names, and then they can go and they can call you every worst thing in the book, and you have no idea who this person is, and then we complain about a lack of civility, it's like, with the exception of the knockout game, nobody walks up and just gets in somebody's face and starts going off. Because first of all, you can be identified, and you might get hit back because the person who you're going off on knows who you are. But you have all these drive-by attacks from people online, and yes, there's the genie is out of the bottle at this point. It's very easy to be uncivil when you can hide behind anonymity. And then the same thing goes when you have these journalists, quote unquote journalists nowadays, quoting anonymous sources. Because I'll tell you what, when I was first a professional journalist working for a news organization, if I had walked in with a story that had quotes from an anonymous source, it would be equivalent of me giving my letter of resignation. Because for obvious reasons, the person could be lying, the person could be mistaken, the person could be of dubious intentions. So you never, ever put a story in front of your editor that had an anonymous source in it. If a person wasn't willing to go on the record, they're not in the story. But because journalism standards now have been basically knocked down to nothing, you can reputations can be destroyed. False attacks on politicians, including the president of the United States, can be levied by basically essentially bloggers who throw something out there, and because they're supposedly hiding behind the First Amendment, freedom of the guaranteed freedom of the press, that they can't be really picked apart as easily, at least forcefully, from the government. You can throw anything out there at anybody, and then instead of these people now have to defend themselves based on something that was in some cases made up.
Mm-hmm.
So civility online. Online journalism. I mean, we're sports fans. You see what happens when you have expansion teams in any league. The quality of the play is comes down because the talent has been diluted. Same thing has happened in journalism with the advent of desktop publisher in the early 2000s that made everybody and his brother overnight a quote unquote blogger / journalist. We've got all kinds of people now who are in the business who have high-level access and don't have the experience or the wisdom to be able to be where they're at. But they're the ones who are providing the narratives in the news, and that's sad.
Yeah, even, people who claim to be serious journalists, Anderson Cooper, I think, for one, always kind of reports on things, and Wolf Blitzer is another one. They're very breathless, I guess is the way I put it. It doesn't take much for CNN to have breaking news. Breaking news: President trips on a paperclip. Film at 11. Actually, with that, let's before we go on, it's 12:41. I'm Eric Scott. This is WASR, and my guest Bob Parks, political humorist, writer, Republican, and you can see his work where, Bob?
If you go to blackandblondemedia.com, from there you can read our posts. It'll give you links to our YouTube channels and our Twitter and Facebook posts, and you can see all of the and basically the name of our slogan for our website is Uncomfortable Conservative Commentary. We try to bring different opinions on certain stories of the day, because we're not part of the echo chamber. We try to think things through and think about things from different angles, just to make people think.
Do you get tired when people look at you as the equivalent of a duck-billed platypus? A black Republican? There are not many.
Well, there are pluses and minuses. For example, when my wife and I go to Black Lives Matter or liberal protests, and with our camera, I can fit right in. I mean, I just walk right in there. They don't look at me. They don't bat an eye because they assume I'm one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so there are times when I go to conservative events that I'll walk in and there might be a few heads turned like, is this man an infiltrator? And then someone will walk up and who knows me, who might have invited me, and they'll say, "Hey, Bob, how you doing?" They'll come and introduce me and then everything's cool. So, yeah, it is sort of a, and I'm not going to say it as a curse, but it is kind of a drag when I walk around. You got this Black Lives Matter crap going on, and because I am black, for example, it might be assumed by the average person who walks by me on the street that I am a sympathizer, and I am not. I mean, I make a point where we lived, and whenever I'm out and around, and I see one of the sheriff's vehicles drive by, I wave to them and they wave back, and so they know. And I even had a T-shirt that I wanted to put out in Cafe Press that said, "I'm not one of them."
That sounds like the protest candidate I interviewed for governor last month. His name was Nobody. Legally had it changed. It was quite an interview. In fact, you can see it on or hear it on WASR.net. Now, here's something that another question. One of those questions. Do you get tired kind of being the spokesman for the black community? Because people because you do not. Okay, because
No.
I find that, of course, this is New Hampshire. There are not that many black people. And the ones that I know are, oh, well, they think that whatever this person thinks is what all black people think. And, of course, that's ridiculous.
Well, let's put it this way. And again, I try to be consistent. I take offense. Now, again, I'm one of those people that when I take offense, I don't get all emotional and start flailing my arms and all that. But I do take offense, for example, when something happens in the black community and they bring on Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson or somebody like that and call them a black leader. I did not vote for them. I don't know of any election that we've had in the black community, quote unquote, where we have elected a leader. In fact, black people are the only group in this country that has unelected leaders. You can't tell me who, for example, the Chinese American leader is, can you? Or the Korean American or the Mexican American, but black people have leaders. Same thing with conservatives in the conservative movement. We have all these people who we anoint as conservative leaders. Now, as and this is where there are times when I differ with my wife, but I think, as far as I'm concerned, there is one person who I would put easily put conservative leadership on, and that is Rush Limbaugh, for what he has done in his lifetime for the conservative movement. He has had the greatest impact. But for all these other people, like the head of the Tea Party Patriots, or any of these conservative nonprofits, and they're anointed leaders, I don't ascribe to that. And even when it comes to people like Candace Owens, all these people are saying, oh, she's this brilliant young black conservative. Well, as the case with a lot of these leaders, if you don't do proper vetting and your only source of news is Fox News, where this is the holy grail for a lot of conservatives, it's all about getting on Fox News. If you don't do your homework, then you're going to open yourself up to be duped by people, snake oil salesmen, whatever you want to call them. And you will be made to look the fool when these people implode, which is what a lot of them do from time to time. And there is a list of people, even in recent memory. You have Stacey Dash. You have Joy Villa. She had that Trump dress, and all the conservative men were saying how hot she was, and all the conservative women were seal clapping because of the Trump dress. And then we find out later that she lied when she said that she voted for Trump. She was a Bernie supporter. She was telling people to vote for Jill Stein on Election Day. But because she was on Fox News, because of this whole dress thing, she made it into the upper echelons in the Trump administration and then within the Trump circles. Now you have Candace Owens, who just I think it was the last year or earlier this year, she was on a show saying how she registered as a Republican in the 2018 midterms. But then a couple months after that interview, she was testifying in front of Congress, and she said she's a Democrat. So she's a liar. But because she's saying all the right things and she's an online provocateur, and even, and people didn't even go back and see some of her early posts on her website, which was a doxing website, where she said that she was hoping that because the millennials were now in the unfortunate world of the Tea Party Republicans, that she's hoping that one day soon that we will all, quote unquote, die off, so she and her millennials can take over.
It is. Go ahead.
So, again, it comes back down to vetting and the bestowing of leadership. So, yeah, I don't like being someone who is looked at. I was called once a black leader in the Washington Times, and I had to push back on that and said, no, nobody elected me. I am not a leader. I am just one person, and I'm one person with an opinion. And black people, we don't need leaders, because to say that we do basically demeans us, whereas there are no other group in this country that has unelected leaders that are so enthusiastically approached by the media and other political groups.
It is coming up on 12:50, and Bob Parks is my guest from Black and Blonde Media. 569 Lake is our phone number. Let me ask you this. It is no secret that blacks are the majority of our nation's jails and prisons. And only an idiot would think that racism had nothing to do with that. But on the other hand, they didn't get arrested just because they were standing on a street corner. So I guess the question is, a lot of that problem is of their own making, at least in my opinion. If you hadn't done the crime, maybe racism gave you a higher sentence for it, but you still did the crime and went to jail. So the $64,000 question is, what, at least in your opinion, does the black community need to do to stop this?
Well, it's funny too, because whenever I hear that argument about the crime in the black community, it's you'll hear, especially whether it's from the professoriate class or from the activist class or even the media class, that black people commit crime because it's a result of their socioeconomic conditions.
Right. I'm not saying that. I don't know what the answer is.
But the thing is, they make excuses for black people, and I've always contended that a lot of these people look at black people like they do their pets. If your dog pees in the corner or poops in the corner, you don't get mad at the dog because the dog doesn't know any better. And they're denying black people the humanity of knowing right from wrong. So yes, your original premise, do not do the crime, and you don't put yourself in that position. I've always asked, if black people, let's say, didn't commit crime in the black community for one day.
Okay.
And then, you take that one day and you make it 2 days. And then if all goes well after 2 days, let's try to make it a week. Where do you think all the police cars that surveil the black community looking for bad things going on would have to go? If there was no crime in that neighborhood, they'd have to go someplace else, correct?
Yes, I agree.
So maybe if somebody could just say to black people, don't commit crime, don't mouth off to police officers. Some of us black people have been able to reach a nice older age because we haven't mouthed off to the police officers, so we don't end up getting shot by police officers. We don't try to reach for their weapons. It astounds me a lot of times when I see, especially because of social media and people have their smartphones going, that they get pulled over by the police officer, and their first impulse is to mouth off and not cooperate. Yep. And then nothing good happens after that.
Oh, I agree. We had our local police chief here yesterday, and we were talking briefly about that mouthing off to a cop is not going to help you no matter what your race is. Believe
and I don't
me.
know what your age is, but I remember when I was growing up, we had to be home when the streetlights came on.
Oh, yeah. I'm 55.
There was none of this staying out. But when Bill Clinton came out with midnight basketball primarily for the black community, what is he assuming? That we're all going to be out on the street after midnight getting into God knows what kind of trouble. So all of the standards when it comes to being a law-abiding citizen have been suspended when it comes to black people because, well, we're black people. And we're expected to do bad things, and we're expected to wind up in jail, and we are expected to, and it's all of these. It's based on racial stereotypes imposed on us by the left that excuses bad behavior instead of just saying, if black people are not the only the only people in this country who've ever had to face poverty.
True.
So, we didn't see scores of people being rounded up and put in jail during the Great Depression, and in the early days of the founding of this country, when there were poor people. They weren't out committing all kinds of crime in a disproportionate amount. So it's only because it's been excused and justified by racist liberals who look at black people and deny us the humanity of knowing right from wrong. And when you repeat that often enough, young people are going to hear it and they say, well, it's okay for me to commit crime because, it's all because of Whitey. And then when you don't have fathers in the home.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with it, to be honest. Multi-generations of families that literally do not know who their father is, or if they do, where he is. Now, obviously, that's not every family, but an awful lot of them in this country.
70% of the black community
is born out of wedlock.
Out of wedlock birth rate.
Ouch! That is a big number.
Yeah, and and it's thanks to the Great Society legislation of LBJ. In order to keep the black vote, just be able to pay, make sure that unwed mothers get enough to survive, just enough to survive, a place to live, food, and help with utilities and all that kind of stuff. So it basically made the father irrelevant. And you look at, for example, the NFL on Sundays, whenever they have these Mother's Day things, and you'll see that I would say the vast majority of players, when they introduce their mothers, the mother and the player have different last names.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that, but I guess it kind of makes sense when, when I was in school, when I was in grade school, I don't know, 28, 30 kids in a school, and maybe one or two kids had divorced parents. Mm-hmm. Well, one day, my daughter came home from school. This was a while ago. She's 24 now. She came home and she said, you guys are the only people, I'm the only person in the class whose original parents are still married to each other. And I had to kind of sit down for that one as it rattled around in my brain looking for a place to stay. If you have a classroom of 20, 25 children and 24 of them have divorced parents or single parents, I mean, how did that happen?
I'm sure that there are economic, there are political, there's a bevy of reasons when feminists, for example, were proudly walking around saying, you don't need no man. And that could be true in some cases, but at the same time, you definitely need that dynamic. There were that God created when he made it so man and women could procreate. And then there were the roles that are very traditional. The woman, the mother is the nurturer. The father is basically the enforcer. That's where we have statements like that mothers would use on when it was necessary. And she would say, just wait till your daddy gets home.
Oh, I remember that.
Okay, and that is enough to instilled the fear.
Yes, it did.
The fear of God.
Yes, it did.
But when you take that dynamic out, you have kids roaming the streets because, as I used to say to people, the only thing between my sons and you is me.
Well, let me put it this way. I am not knocking single mothers. It does not automatically follow that a child will not have a good upbringing from a single parent. I want to make that very clear. Okay. But it is exponentially harder, unfortunately. And let me tell you, it was tough enough for both of us to raise our kids. I can't even imagine what it's like for one person to have to do it. That's a lot of work, and I don't envy it at all. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Bob Parks of Black and Blonde Media. If you just Google it, you'll be able to find it, right, Bob?
Sure enough.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Bob, it was once again fantastic talking to you.
Let's try not to do it once a decade.
Yeah, I'd like to do it a little bit more than that.